is everybody today? Fantastic. Well, listen, I know I am just one item on a long menu that is facing you this afternoon, so I am going to do everything I can to be brief. As King Henry VIII said to each of his wives, I won't keep you long. Okay. Now listen, I am a journalist who has been asked to talk to you about Pope Francis and mercy. Okay? And if you have a right to expect anything at all from a journalist, and frankly, I would counsel you not to expect very much, but if you have a right to expect anything, it is that a journalist will get his or her facts right. So let us start this afternoon with a fact, not a hunch, not a theory, not an anecdotal impression, not a gut-level instinct, but a hardcore, empirical, hang your hat on it, take it to the bank fact. And that fact is, as of today, what are we? This is June 4th, right? Am I right about that? As of today, June 4th, 2016, Pope Francis is easily the most popular religious figure on the face of the planet, and one of the most popular figures of any sort. Now, there are a variety of ways I could demonstrate the facticity of that to you. Let's begin with this. Do you folks know that Pope Francis just broke the 30 million barrier for his following on Twitter? The following of his 9 combined Twitter accounts. Now, that does not yet make him the most followed person on Twitter. Anybody here know, as of today, who the most followed person on Twitter is? Okay, the correct answer, ladies and gentlemen, as of today, is Katy Perry. Katy Perry. The top 5 in order are Katy Perry, Barack Obama, Justin Bieber, Taylor Swift, and Lady Gaga. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, surely the apocalypse cannot be far behind. But, you know, come on, give the Pope a break. He's only been on Twitter 3 years. 30 million is not too bad. Or we could talk about the Pope's, his poll numbers. Once again, it is a fact that in every corner of the world where public opinion can be scientifically measured, this Pope has approval ratings that politicians and celebrities would sacrifice their children to pagan gods to obtain. Okay. Take, for example, the most recent Gallup USA Today poll in the United States, which found that overall, Pope Francis has a 78% approval rating among Americans generally. That's 78%. And in my opinion, the most remarkable element of the poll, he has a 90%, that is 90% approval rating among American Catholics. Now, sit with that number for a moment, 90%, and put it in the context of what most of us in this room know about how badly divided American Catholics are on most things, right? I mean, let's face it, under ordinary circumstances, it would be tough to get 90% of American Catholics to agree that today is Saturday, right? I mean, on the left, you would have an outfit that suspects a hierarchical plot to control our sense of time. And on the right, you would have some grumps who think we should still be using the Julian calendar, right? And in that context, the fact that the Pope has a 90% approval rating among American Catholics is nothing short of remarkable. And frankly, when we get around to beatifying and canonizing Jorge Mario Bergoglio, I suspect this could count as his first miracle, okay? Or we could talk about all the magazine covers the Pope has been on. As you know, Times Person of the Year. I mean, for God's sakes, ladies and gentlemen, the Pope was on the cover of the Rolling Stone. And yes, I did buy 5 copies for my mother, okay? And we could go on and on, cataloging all of the ways in which it is clear that Francis is sort of a pop culture phenomenon. But obviously, the substantive question to be asked about all this is, what's underneath all of that? I mean, is this just a case of a new celebrity bursting on the scene and sort of taking the world by storm? Or is there something serious something evangelical, something almost mystical that provides the fire beneath the smoke, the steak beneath the sizzle. And I want to suggest to you that there is something substantive there that explains the way that Pope Francis has taken the world by storm, captured the public imagination. I want to suggest that there are three pillars to the Francis Revolution, three sort of cornerstones of his outlook and his agenda for the church in our time, all of which represent something for which the world in which we live is desperately hungry, and they explain the way people have responded to this new phenomenon on the global stage. So let me list those three things for you briefly, and then I'll unpack each in turn. One, with Pope Francis, what you get is a genuine commitment to humility and simplicity. A genuine commitment to humility and simplicity. Two, you get a genuinely and profoundly missionary concept of church. A profoundly missionary concept of the role of the church in our time. And then third, but not least, mercy. Mercy as the sort of spiritual Rosetta Stone for this Pope, the key that unlocks his view of the world, his sense of priorities, and what we see him doing. Okay? Let us begin with the genuine commitment to humility and simplicity. Now, of course, we all know that we live in an era of kind of blow-dried, self-aggrandizing celebrities. I don't want to get into the politics of 2016, but, you know, not the worst example of the phenomenon I'm talking about. And so people are hungry for someone who genuinely seems not to be drunk on themselves, to be in contact with the experience and the drama of ordinary people, who seems not to take themselves too seriously despite whatever exalted position they may hold. And what they see in Pope Francis is someone for whom that's not just talk, but that's the reality of his life and the way he conducts himself. Now, I could illustrate that to you 1,000 different ways, but let me tell you the story of the first time I met then Archbishop Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Buenos Aires. This was in 2001. I was in Rome, living there at the time. I was covering a synod of bishops. That's this event in which the Pope summons about 300 bishops from around the world to advise him on some topic. This particular synod was on the Eucharist. And as it happened, the guy who was supposed to be the chairman of that synod, running its meetings every day, was Archbishop, he wasn't a cardinal yet, Archbishop Edward Egan of New York. However, the synod began on September 14th, 2001. Now, you may remember that something happened on September 11th of 2001 in New York that, of course, compelled Archbishop Egan to pull out. He had to go back and be with his people in New York after the Twin Towers came down. I had arranged an interview with Egan for the first week of the synod, and he called me up and he said, listen, John, I'm sure you understand, I got to go home. I got to be in New York right now. Now, the guy who is going to be taking over for me, as the technical term is a relator, basically the chairman of the synod, said the guy who's going to be taking over for me is the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Okay, would you have, and I told him I had this appointment with you. He said he'd be willing to keep it. Do you want to interview him? Now, I was an American reporter 3 days after 9/11. To be honest with you, interviewing the Archbishop of Buenos Aires was not at the top of my to-do list. But I said, you know, Egan was being a nice guy and all of that. So I said, sure. So the appointment was set up to take place in the Casa Santa Marta. That's that hotel on Vatican grounds. It's famous now because it's where the Pope was living, but back then it was just a hotel. And if you've ever been there, okay, what happens is they've got these like smoked glass sliding doors when you walk up. So these doors open up. There are spiral staircases on either side, so you walk down one of these spiral staircases. They kind of dump you at the reception desk. And what you do is you go up to the reception desk and you say, I am here to see His Eminence so-and-so. They then call up to the guy's room and they get his flunky on the line, and the flunky says, well, His Eminence is very busy. He'll be down in, whatever, 10 minutes. Then they put you in a waiting room. Then the flunky comes in to make sure everything is copacetic, and then and only then does the kind of big dog walk onto the scene. Okay, that's typically how it works. So I showed up for my meeting with Bergoglio. I walk in those sliding glass doors, okay, and I see, now I'd never met him before at that point, this is 2001. I see sitting on a folding chair, okay, in the lobby inside, or in that little area right inside these glass doors, I see a simple priest just wearing kind of, clerical blacks. And I'm kind of startled because there's never anybody there. I look at him and say, excuse me, I'm here to see Archbishop Bergoglio. And he looks up and says, yeah, I'm Bergoglio. Okay, I said, okay, well, where do you want to talk? And he said, well, we could probably just get another chair and do it right here. And I said, you really don't know how this works, do you? Because if we go downstairs and you say, I'm the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, I want a room, they're going to give you a room. Okay, and he said, well, if you think that would be better. And I said, well, people are going to be walking in. It might be easier. So anyway, we go downstairs, and he just stands there. So I say to the guy, excuse me, this is His Excellency Bergoglio from Buenos Aires, and he would like to have a meeting room. And they say, of course. And 8 guys scuttle off to turn on the lights in a room. And so we go into this room. And then Bergoglio looks at me and says, now, would you like some coffee or some water? And again, I said, man, you really don't know how this works. Okay, because see all those guys in white tuxedos standing off in the corner, okay? If you just tell them what you want, they're going to bring it to you. And then, we went on and had a charming conversation in which he was completely open and completely candid. And the point is this, okay? I can testify from my own limited personal experience that the humble, simple figure you see on the public stage, that's not a faux PR exercise, okay? That's not messaging that has been whipped up in a Vatican war room someplace, okay? That is the real man. Now, humble and simple is not all that Jorge Mario Bergoglio is. If you want a 5-star banner headline, dare not forget about it, insight into this Pope, ladies and gentlemen, here it is in full living color. Okay, beneath that humble, simple exterior lies the mind of a brilliant Jesuit politician. Okay, Pope Francis knows what he is doing at all times. There is a careful calculation behind the decisions he makes. But that does not make the humility and the simplicity insincere. It is the real man. I'll tell you one final story, this one out of Argentina. In 2013, when Bergoglio was elected to the papacy, I went down for a month to do some reporting. One of the places I went was one of the vicious miserias, the so-called villas of misery, the slums that ring Buenos Aires. And I asked a pastor there, a guy by the name of Juan Isasmendi, if this tagline about Bergoglio being the bishop of the slums, if that was rhetoric or if that was real. And what Isasmendi said, well, don't ask me, just go out into the street, okay, and ask people. So I did. I took my translator out into the street. We stopped about 5 or 6 people in this god-awful neighborhood at random. And I said, what can you tell me about the new Pope? And you know what they did? Before they even verbalized an answer, every one of them ran back into these tin shacks or these wooden hovels that they called homes. And they came back out with prized family photos that showed Bergoglio baptizing their children, or confirming their nephews, or sitting in their living rooms when their husband had died, because that's where this Pope spent his time. Okay? So this business about humility, simplicity, passion for ordinary people, it is not simply window dressing. It is not simply imagery. It is the reality of the man, and I think that is part of what the world is responding to. Okay, secondly, a missionary concept of church, a missionary concept of church. Folks, I have been covering popes for the better part of 20 years. Okay, I covered the last 12 years or so of John Paul's papacy. I covered all of Benedict's papacy, and I am now on to Francis. And if there is one conclusion, ironclad, totally certain conclusion I have drawn on the back of that experience, it is that the papacy, as we have come to understand it in our time, is essentially an impossible job. Okay? Think about what we expect popes to be. Okay? And I'm not talking about what it says in the Catechism of the Catholic Church or the Code of Canon Law, but I mean out in the street. Okay? If you stop people and ask them what they expect of popes, okay? I think, popularly, we want popes to be political titans that can wave a magic wand and somehow recast the political die all over the world. We want popes to be intellectual giants that have something to say on every important issue in the culture. We want popes to be CEOs of a complex religious multinational. Okay? We want popes to be media icons and rock stars. And, of course, dare we not forget, we also want them to be living saints. Okay? Now, any one of those things is difficult to do well. You roll them all up into one ball, it is a prescription for perpetual heartburn. Okay? Which means popes have to choose. They have to choose where they are going to invest their time and treasure. Now, when it comes to Pope Francis, I guarantee you that when Pope Francis gets out of bed in the morning, he does not fundamentally think of himself as a politician, even though engaging the political affairs of the day has been an important aspect of his papacy, and he has made a real difference in many parts of the world. This is a pope who helped bring peace to the Central African Republic. This is a pope who helped restore diplomatic relations between the United States and Cuba. So it's not that he doesn't think that's important, but it's not the core of how he understands himself. Equally, I guarantee you that when Pope Francis gets out of bed in the morning, he does not fundamentally see himself as a manager, even though management reform of the church, beginning with the Roman Curia, which is the central bureaucracy there in the Vatican, that's an important part of his mandate, and he's been working hard at it. But when Pope Francis gets out of bed in the morning, I guarantee you, fundamentally, he thinks of himself as a missionary. He wants to be the missionary in chief of the Catholic Church. Remember that this was a man whose priestly vocation was born with the dream of going to Asia and becoming another in that long line of great Jesuit missionaries that stretches all the way back to Matteo Ricci and Francis Xavier. Now, obviously, life had something else in store for him, but the embers of that missionary vocation still smolder and burn in his heart. And he is trying to lead the church in our time to become an ever more missionary church, where we are not attached primarily to our infrastructures, to our systems, to our bureaucracies, but we put ourselves out in the street where real people live to bring them the message of God's love and mercy. There is something that Francis says over and over again so often that it probably ought to be printed on bumper stickers and t-shirts, and that is his call for the church to get out of the sacristy and into the street. Out of the sacristy and into the street. It is fundamentally a missionary call to arms. Okay? And as Pope Francis sees it, this call to mission, at one level, yes, it is structural and systematic, But at another level, it is very retail level. It is one-on-one, person to person. It's about being attentive to your environment, being aware of that person in your immediate sphere of influence at any given time who may be especially in need of a taste of God's love and mercy. So, for example, when you see Pope Francis doing something like stopping the Pope-mobile in St. Peter's Square because he has caught sight out of the corner of his eye of an Italian man, 37 years old, by the name of Vincenzo Riva, who has a genetic skin disorder that has left his body horribly disfigured with boils from head to toe. The kind of guy that most of us would cross the street to avoid because, frankly, we would be embarrassed and wouldn't know what to say. Pope Francis instead walks up to this guy, wraps him in a warm, loving embrace, plants a kiss on the top of his head, causing the guy to shed tears. I later had the chance to interview him. He told me he had not been in a Catholic church for 20 years, but he felt a tug to this Pope, and that moment with the Pope had brought him back to the faith. Okay? When you see the Pope doing that kind of thing, again, this isn't just a cheap PR exercise. It's not a photo op. In his mind, it is mission in action. Or when you see him inviting a 16-year-old Italian teenager with Down syndrome up onto the Pope-mobile to take a swing with him through St. Peter's Square. Again, this is mission in action. When you see him inviting 3 homeless guys up to share his birthday breakfast. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't just the 3 homeless guys, it was also their dog, who was named Marley, for the reggae icon Bob Marley. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Pope Francis is a pope of firsts in a lot of ways. I guarantee you this is one of them. I promise you this is the first time the name Bob Marley has ever been uttered in the corridors of the Vatican. I later interviewed these 3 guys, and I asked them, so did the Pope know who Bob Marley is? And the answer was, no, he didn't know, but once we explained it to him, he thought it was cool. Okay. Again, all of that is not just exhibitionism. It's not about, supplying a cool photo for the wire agencies to carry on the morning's feed. It's about setting a tone for the life of the church. It's about teaching us through example what mission in action looks like. And again, I think what the world sees when they look at this Pope, they understand that commitment to mission. They understand the objects of that mission are them, and they respond to the love and the outreach that Francis is trying to project. Finally, the third pillar of the Francis Revolution, mercy. Mercy as the cornerstone spiritual message for the church in this period of time. As I told you, ladies and gentlemen, I have been covering popes for a while. I've had the privilege of covering 3 greats. I have covered Saint John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis. And I can promise you that these were all extraordinarily thoughtful, complex men. It is simply impossible to boil them down into handy-dandy little sound bites. Having said that, let me proceed to boil each man down into a handy-dandy little soundbite. Because I think with each pope, there was a kind of signature phrase that sort of captured what they're about. With John Paul, there is no doubt at all what that signature phrase is. And if you tune in to World Youth Day this July in Krakow, Poland, you will hear this over and over and over again. That signature phrase was, "Be not afraid." Be not afraid. The Latin version of which was "Duc in altum," set out into the deep. John Paul was sort of the John Wayne of popes, right? I mean, he had this sort of brash, bold sort of swagger and confidence about him, and he was trying to invite the church to recapture its sense of adventure and to reignite its ability to change the world in the here and now. And of course, his success in multiple ways, most notably his role in the collapse of European communism, is the stuff of legend. With Benedict XVI, again, I think there is no serious doubt, his signature phrase was reason and faith. Reason and faith. That was the heart of the pitch he's making to the world. That reason shorn of faith becomes skepticism and nihilism. Faith shorn of reason becomes fundamentalism and extremism. That to be healthy, these two things need each other. Okay? Now, it is still early with Francis, but I think we already know what his signature phrase is, because he says it over and over and over again, never misses an opportunity to roll this out. And that standard phrase, ladies and gentlemen, is, the Lord never tires of forgiving. The Lord never tires of forgiving. And sometimes he adds, it is we who get tired of asking for forgiveness. It is fundamentally, ladies and gentlemen, a message of mercy. Okay. Mercy is quite literally this Pope's motto. His motto as Pope is the same motto he had as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. It's a phrase that comes from the Venerable Bede, a homily by Bede on the gospel scene of the call of St. Matthew. It's a little hard to translate from the Latin. In Latin, the phrase is miserando atque elegendo. Basically, what that means is choosing through mercy, making decisions on the basis of mercy. Okay. Mercy is the absolute core of Pope Francis's agenda. Mercy was in his first homily as Pope, which he chose to celebrate not in St. Peter's Basilica, but in St. Anne's Church, which is the parish church for the worker bees in the Vatican. First Sunday after his election, he walked up to the ambo, no notes, no nothing, and said, I hope all the theologians in the room will forgive me, but in my opinion, the strongest message of the Lord is mercy. Now, you can see the Holy Father's passion for mercy in a variety of ways, including his profound commitment to the sacrament of confession. Okay. As you may know, he is the first Pope. He's not the first Pope to hear confessions himself in St. Peter's Basilica during Lent. He is the first Pope, however, who has himself made a confession in St. Peter's Basilica before going on to hear confessions. And you can see this absolute sort of love affair that he has with the confessional in a variety of different ways. Here's my favorite example. I presume a lot of you know that a pope is also the Bishop of Rome, right? In other words, he's the head of the local diocese in Rome. And one of the ways popes try to sort of live up to that is by getting around and making parish visits. There are 273 working parishes in the city of Rome. Few popes get to them all. John Paul got to a lot of them over the course of almost 27 years. Francis has visited about 10 so far. His first parish visit came on May 24th, 2013, when he went out to the parish of Saints Elizabeth and Zechariah, which is in the Porta di Roma neighborhood on the northern outskirts of the city. It's kind of a working class neighborhood. Now, the pastor at this parish is a guy I know. He's a Romanian immigrant by the name of Father Beoni Ambris. Everybody there calls him Padre Ben. So when I heard the Pope was going, I called him up and said, hey, Ben, is it okay if I come out that morning and just kind of be a fly on the wall, you know, see what happens? And he said, sure. He said, why don't you come by a little early, we'll have coffee, and then we'll get fired up, okay? Now, the Pope was supposed to get there at 10:30, so I got there at about 9 o'clock in the morning, okay? At 9:30, we are sitting in Father Ben's office drinking coffee when we start to hear the thump, thump, thump of a helicopter in the distance, okay? Now, initially, we think this is the Italian Carabinieri, the military police, who are kind of doing a security flyover. But then that thump, thump, thump gets louder and louder and louder, and we realize, oh my God, that's the papal helicopter, okay? Now, after I ran to get a defibrillator to restart Father Ben's heart, he got up and sprinted out into the parking lot where they had set up this makeshift helipad, right? Pope lands, he's 45 minutes early, okay? He pops out of the white papal chopper, and he says, listen, I'm sorry for the early start, but in addition to saying Mass and chatting with the folks, I would also like to hear some confessions. Okay. Now, bear in mind, this was not part of the program. Okay. So Father Ben ran and grabbed 8 people basically at random and said to them, "You are going to confession." Now, it's so cute. I was standing right there, and one of these guys said, "But Father, I've been here for 3 hours. I don't want to lose my spot in line to see the Pope." To which Ben said, "Oh, trust me, you're going to see the Pope." Okay. So he brought these 8 folks into the church, lined them up in front of the confessional, one by one. Pope Francis sat there, heard their sins, and then administered God's forgiveness. Now, catch the point. In part, this was just him being a good Bishop of Rome. But in part, this was the savvy Jesuit politician wanting the world to watch as the Pope celebrated the church's premier rite of mercy. This is a Pope, ladies and gentlemen, who believes in his heart, in his soul, that the providential reason for his election to the papacy was to lift up the gospel of mercy and make it resplendent again. You may know that Pope Francis has this habit at the end of his international trips of doing these impromptu press conferences on the papal plane on the way back to Rome. I've been there for virtually all of them. Let me tell you this, folks. In general, traveling with the Pope as a reporter is a pretty dismal experience, okay? Because they put you in the back of steerage. You know, the seats are uncomfortable, the food is mediocre, but with Pope Francis, I will give it this, the in-flight entertainment is spectacular, okay? Because the Pope just talks to us with no filters, no notes, no handling or anything. And anyway, in the very first of these was when he went to Brazil in 2013 on the way back. We asked him a question about divorced and civilly remarried Catholics. He answered the question, but he said, "I would like to go on to make a bigger point." He said, "I believe that my papacy, this moment," said, "I believe that this is a kairos of mercy." A kairos of mercy, using that evocative Greek New Testament term that means a privileged moment in God's plan of salvation. Now listen, Pope Francis is no naive. He understands that as a minister of the Christian gospel, he has to pronounce both God's mercy and God's judgment on a fallen world. One without the other would be an oversimplification. But his calculation is that in many important respects, the world has already heard our judgment with crystal clarity. And now what the world needs to hear and to see and to feel and to taste and yes, even to smell is our mercy. In the long run of history, I believe that Pope Francis is going to be remembered as the Pope of Mercy. Pope of Mercy, not the Pope who invented the concept of mercy, obviously. I mean, the death of Christ on the cross is the supreme act of mercy in the history of humanity. But the one who, at a time when our commitment to mercy was sometimes difficult to sense and experience and get your hands around, this is the Pope who lifted it up, dusted it off, made it visible, palpable, attractive, and compelling again. Ladies and gentlemen, Pope Francis is indeed the Pope of Mercy. Now, you put those 3 things together, a genuine commitment to simplicity of life, a missionary hustle for the church in our time, and then third, the gospel of mercy is the core of it all. If you understand those 3 things about Pope Francis, you will be in a position to understand most of what he is saying and doing. I would submit to you one last thought. The real question, I would suggest, isn't just what Pope Francis is about. The real question is, are those 3 things, a commitment to simplicity, a commitment to missionary hustle, and a commitment to mercy, are those things true not merely of the Pope, are they also true of the church he leads? Is that genuinely the church as we see it, experience it, and live it? Because here's the thing, folks, the miracle of Francis, and I speak now as a media professional, the miracle of Francis is that after a long period of time in which a wide swath of the secular world had sort of tuned us out, okay, had already reached conclusions about who we are and what they think of us, because of the attractiveness, because of the ferment around Francis, the world is now looking at us again. And for once, they are not looking at us through the lens of scandal or crisis or meltdown or controversy, but they are looking at us through the lens of sympathetic interest. The key question, folks, is now that the world is looking at us, what are they going to see? Because the vast majority of people, folks, who are interested in Francis, who may have heard something he said or seen something he's done, and as you know, he is forever doing things. If you haven't seen the story, just today he gave a scooter to a homebound elderly couple in Rome that suffers from diabetes and can't get out of the house. Somebody had given him a scooter, and his charity guy had told him, well, I know this elderly couple that could probably use it. So of course, Francis personally presents it to them. Okay, so when people see that kind of thing, and they're attracted to it, okay, most of them are not going to get on a plane and go to Rome and knock on room 201 of the Casa Santa Marta and have a chat with Francis. You'd be shocked at how easy it is to do that, actually. But most people are not going to do that. Most people are going to walk down the corner to the local Catholic church in their neighborhood. And the question is, what are they going to experience when they walk inside that door? In that space, are they going to find a genuine commitment to simplicity and a love for ordinary people? Are they going to find a real sense of missionary drive? And are they going to find a palpable spirit of mercy? Now, if that's what we're going to accomplish in our time, if that's the kind of church that we are going to sustain and foster, it is going to require a variety of qualities of heart and mind from us, folks. It is going to require persistence. It is going to require creativity. It is going to require imagination. It is going to require fidelity. But I want to suggest to you one last quality of heart and mind that is absolutely essential. It is a sine qua non. Okay, we can't pull it off without this. And that quality of heart and mind is a lively sense of humor. Okay? If we can't occasionally laugh at ourselves and our circumstances, we are going to spend all of our time, wringing our hands in shoving down angst. That is not a winning missionary strategy. And I want to tell you one last story to drive the point home, that the good news is you can find this winning sense of humor in the Catholic Church in the most unlikely places. So one last Pope story, this one not about Pope Francis, but his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI. Who, by the way, as you know, in terms of his public reputation, was not exactly seen as a laugh riot. Okay, unfairly, tremendously unfairly, but that was not his image, okay? Anyway, in 2005, I did a book about the new Pope, that was when Pope Benedict was elected, called The Rise of Benedict XVI. There is a tradition in the Vatican Press Corps that when one of us writes a book about the Holy Father, we inscribe a copy to him. And then we give it either to his priest secretary or his spokesman, someone in his inner circle, right? And so when my book came out, I dutifully inscribed a copy to Benedict, and I gave it to Joaquin Navarro-Valls, a Spanish layman who at the time was still the Pope's spokesman. Now, to be honest with you, it had never entered my mind for a second that the Pope would actually read these books. Okay? I mean, in my mind's eye, I had imagined a box in the basement of the Apostolic Palace, where they all kind of gather dust. So, I gave my book, Benedict was elected in April. I wrote my book in May. Comes out June 1st. I gave the copy to Navarro-Valls and forgot about it. Flash forward to August. My wife and I are back in the United States visiting my grandma. Now, we just lost her, but at the time, I think she would have been 92. My grandma lived out in a rural western Kansas place called Hill City. It is my candidate for the worst place name in America because there is no hill, and there sure as hell is no city. Okay, we're talking like 600 people, and that's on Sunday when everybody comes in for church. I mean, listen, I grew up there, okay? I will tell you this. The only time of year when anybody who isn't from that place would ever go to Hill City is during the fall, because that's pheasant hunting season. Okay. Do y'all know what a pheasant is? It's kind of a little game bird, kind of like a turkey. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I have traveled pretty wide, pretty far and wide in this world. I made about 60 trips with John Paul II, 21 with Benedict XVI. I've made most of Francis's. I've traveled widely on my own. I have stayed in some pretty funky lodgings, okay? The one motel in Hill City, America, 11-room hotel, okay, is the only place on God's earth I have ever stayed where there is a laminated sign in the bathroom that reads, "Please do not gut your birds in the sink." I am not making this up. The first time I took my wife there, she said, "Is this some kind of weird sexual thing?" And I had to explain, "No, honey, this is face value stuff," all right? So anyway, there we are in Graham County, America. And my cell phone goes off, and it's Joaquin Navarro-Valls on the other end, the papal spokesman. And he says, well, John, I wanted you to know that I am with the Holy Father on vacation. They were up in northern Italy. He said, I'm with the Holy Father on vacation. And he came down to breakfast this morning with your book in his hands, and he asked me to deliver to you a personal message. Now, I don't know about you, okay, but if you have just been told the Pope has a personal reaction to something you've written about him, I would want to make sure that your tray table is in a full upright and locked position, okay? But I said, Joaquin, that's marvelous, of course. What's the message? Now, to get this, you need to understand, my book was divided into thirds, okay? So the first part were the final days of John Paul II. The middle part was the inside story of how Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger had been elected as Pope Benedict XVI. And the third part was my projections on where his papacy was going to go, okay? So Navarro says, the Holy Father's message is the following. Please thank Herr Dr. Allen for having written this book, particularly the third part about the future of my papacy, because it has saved me the trouble of thinking about it for myself. I think he was kidding, by the way. Ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest that on this front, as on so many others, we take our cue from the Holy Fathers, plural. If we can take an unflinching, clear-eyed, utterly realistic look at the challenges in front of us, the obstacles that prevent us from attaining this vision of a church that is truly simple, truly missionary, and truly merciful, if we can acknowledge all that with crystal clarity, but if we can do that with a twinkle in our eye rather than rage in our hearts and bile in our spleens, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a winning strategy for Catholic life in the 21st century, every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the Archdiocese of Atlanta. Ladies and gentlemen, Viva il Papa! Viva il Papa! Viva il Papa! Viva il Papa!